Some events can be life-changing and stain your mind forever. Over the past 4 decades, the AYR has collected and documented countless Yowie reports from all across the country. Our extensive files stretch back to the early 1800s, meticulously cataloguing encounters that intrigue enthusiasts, scientists and skeptics alike. Through our expeditions, somewhat legendary in their own right, we've gathered significant evidence that suggests the Yowie is more than mere myth. It is an extant hominid that warrants serious study. Occasionally, a report of an encounter is submitted from a location with a personal significance for the team, or resonates deeply with myself. Quite often it's a locality with a notorious reputation, where other events have unfolded in the past. Today's report is exactly that. This one for me holds particular relevance. Although my first encounter was at Eagle Heights, Mount Tamborine in 1995, as you'd all know, my life-changing experience began in a town named Ormeau, halfway between the Gold Coast and Brisbane in 1997. As most research enthusiasts know, this was the catalyst for the creation of AYR. Because I've covered this incident so many times over the years, many people could probably recount the incident verbatim. I was a confident, physical fit guy with a history of mixed martial arts. Not a lot rattled me, but on that night when I believed that I was about to die and there was nothing I could do to defend myself, my reality changed. When you've been at the total mercy of a creature resembling and sounding like a giant hairy monster, which you were told as a child didn't exist, you want answers. In those times, there was no readily available information on the subject, and the internet had nothing to offer other than a handful of American Bigfoot sites. My goal was to change that, and I did.
Yes, are you involved with the people that investigate Yowie sightings? We've got quite a serious problem with these creatures on our property.
In a matter of a week or two, after what I believed was a close death situation, I moved to Sydney and spent over a year researching the Blue Mountains west of Sydney, where I gained a lot of knowledge about the Yowie. This is a story about one particular Yowie who I spent more nights with than I can remember. But that's a story for another time. During my time in New South Wales, I made lifelong friends with legendary researchers such as Paul Cropper, Tony Healy, Mike Williams, Rebecca Lang, Gary Opert, Paul Clasher, Dr. Helmut Lufswissower, Lloyd Pye, Buck Buckingham, Steve the Dentist, and many lesser-known researchers that I'm still close to today. Sadly, over time, many have passed away. When I returned from Sydney to the Gold Coast, Australian Yowie Research, or Yowiehunters.com, was already formed, which was the first website on the internet and in the world, dedicated to documenting sightings of the Yowie. As we began the database and added an actual voice to the witnesses, reports began to flood in, and expeditions were underway. Witnesses hearing other witnesses tell of their experiences gave many the strength to also come forward. With the help of Paul Cropper and Tony Healy, we were the first website in the world to play witness audio reports, where listeners could hear the actual witness tell of their own encounters using their own voices. This was well prior to YouTube and a huge step forward. Even the established American Bigfooters were impressed. Soon the Australian media started to take an interest, with one of the first articles focusing on Ormeau. During many of my early interviews in print, radio or TV, The incredible night of the Ormeau incident in 1997 was regularly spoken about in conversation. Further articles followed, focusing on my Ormeau encounter. Soon after the Gold Coast Bulletin ran their article, we were contacted by Nine's Today Show.
Now look, there are plenty of skeptics who are convinced that our next guest will not find what he's looking for because he is looking for Yowies. And the man who's doing all the searching for the mystical beast is Yowie hunter Dean Harrison, and he's in our studios in Brisbane. Dean, good morning to you.
In various areas, the most prominent place in Australia that I found the Yowies would be the Blue Mountains.
And did you believe in them before you saw the first one?
Well, my first encounter was back in July 97, and I had a very aggressive encounter in Ormeau, which is just below Beenleigh in southeast Queensland.
Brisbane Extra joined in.
Beings are legendary. There's the North American Bigfoot, the abominable snowman or Yeti, and of course their Aussie cousin, the Yowie.
Most TV stories on Yowies include predictable images of an imposter dressed in a hairy suit to add visual emphasis to the reports. Dean relies on no such exaggeration. Because of a lucky coincidence, his bush sighting was indirectly witnessed by wife at home.
When I was on the phone, just turned around and there it was.
I actually heard a noise through the phone and I said, "What's that noise?" to him, and he said, "I don't know, it's big, whatever it is, and it looks like it, I feel like it's coming this way."
It roared like a lion and a bear, all in one. It was extremely aggressive, and I thought I was dead that night.
One favoured search site is bushland behind the township of Ormeau, just south of Brisbane.
He's never looked back, only up and down.
I think the mistake that most people make is that they're often looking at the ground and not looking up in the trees, because quite often these things will be in the trees, obviously.
It's claimed Springbrook in the Gold Coast hinterland is home to at least one Yowie, and they even have a cast of a footprint 40 centimetres long to prove it.
It's the same footprint. You've got the big toe over on this side, matches this toe exactly.
Locals have always believed the Yowie exists. Some even say they've...
One night, while jogging in a thicket next to the suburban streets of his hometown, stopping to talk to his wife on the phone, he began to hear a commotion in the bushes.
And then I'd hear the foliage being parted, and whatever it was getting closer. So I said to my wife, I think there's some guy sneaking up behind. What is that? My very first flinch to move my foot. It was the most gruesome bellowing roar I'd ever heard in my life. It resembled something between a lion and a bear all in one. As I'm running, this thing was in full flight. It took the bush line round to my left, and it ran about 4 times my speed through foliage that I couldn't even walk through in that sort of darkness. It was bellowing and roaring the whole time. On every step there was a huge guttural grunt. Nothing the likes I've ever seen in my life, and nothing that Hollywood has yet ever depicted. It was so powerful. If this thing had got hold of me, I wouldn't have had time to scream. It would have snapped my neck like a toothpick, just like that.
Jogged down this track this particular night, I wouldn't be here now. Now, I stopped to make a phone call that night, and luckily I did. Now, what happened that night was so scary. It was so terrifying. This thing had huge strength, massive speed, vocal capacity was enormous. I always likened it to, say, something like a bear and a lion rolled into one. Now, I only just got out of there with my life that night, and I was very, very fortunate. Now, after you have an experience like that, where you really, truly feel that you're going to lose your life to one of these things, you want answers. Now, 1997 was embryonic stages of the internet, so there was no information around for me. I had to find answers. There was nothing available, so this is how it was formed, AYR.
Yeah, well, that's really fascinating.
And my comment was, no, I'll just let this person come as close as they want and I'll see what's on his mind. And so with my back to the bush, now totally absorbed with what was going on behind me, this person, which I thought at the time, came right up to the bush line, which was about 10 metres behind me. And suddenly I got these chills of something. It was an experience that I've never, ever had in my life. These chills ran from my feet to my head and back down again, and my body was locked solid. I had no rhyme or reason. I've never experienced anything like this. I was like a rabbit in spotlights. I knew something was wrong. It's like a sixth sense just kicked in, and all your alarm bells just went off.
There are a long list of encounters in Ormeau between 1997 and 2017. And other reports we received from Ormeau to this day contain all the hallmarks of a Yowie encounter. Natalie had 2 strange occurrences on the same night.
I take my dog, I take him for a really long walk during the night. You know that smell, that really strong sort of chemical smell? That really dense, thick, very organic smell. So that was everywhere. And all of a sudden the dog took off like a shot and he started barking, and he doesn't ever leave my side. This dog is so well trained. But then I could hear footsteps, like really heavy footsteps. So these weren't, if they belonged to a person, this person had to be a good maybe 150 kilos plus. Running away from me, they weren't running towards me, they were running away. I could see this thing through the trees. It didn't look normal. It didn't look like it's really hard to describe because it was tall, but it wasn't human-like. It didn't look like human-like. Elongated thighs, elongated calves. The movement of it just didn't look right. It didn't look like normal human mechanics. The legs were too long. If those legs belonged to a person, you'd put them on, say, someone who's at 7 foot. This is not right. Yes, my daughter and I were watching this show, and there was this weird screaming type noise, and we both looked at each other and went, what the hell was that? I can't even describe what kind of noise it was, but it was this really like a loud bellow noise. I asked my neighbour if she heard it as well.
If we would go through all the history, we'd be here for days, not minutes. So here's one last report from Jason, the timber cutter.
And the only place it really didn't have hair was like around the eyes and around the nose. And that's how it was sort of like flattened almost, like, but big, like a big head. I mean, in proportion to, I don't know, his body size.
So where was it? It was down the slope from you?
It was down the slope. Like I saw a face and a thing like stood up at me when I was looking at it. It looked like he had no neck and it was just hair all over him, like dark brown kind of hair. But his face looked like, not like a monkey or ape, but it was crouched down at first and he was looking at me and I looked over and was staring at it and it stood up. He had a weird forehead. He had big eyes, you know what I mean? His face would look like, I've seen pictures of Neanderthal men and that's probably the closest thing that it looked like, but his face was more flattened.
Now, you said it had a weird forehead. What was it, big or wide or flat or open or?
It was wide and flat. Just the forehead was more protruded than ours are, you know?
Okay, does that mean the eyes were sort of sunken in or sticking out or?
They were big, but they were like they're blended in like almost like his face was flat.
Yeah.
It wasn't bulgy or nothing.
What about its nose? Was it, did it stick out or was it flat or was it?
Like when you punch someone in the nose and it flattens it out, it looked a bit like that.
I think we've painted the picture and expressed why the Ormeau reports resonate so passionately with me. My incident was truly life-changing. While we're cooking Ormeau in the kitchen, let's dive straight into the latest report from one of my favourite locations. As I say, welcome back to Ormeau.
In 2017, around May. I start work at like 4:30 in the morning, so I was leaving home to go to work, which is Upper Ormeau Road, basically Ormeau, but they call it Kingsholme, right near the quarry there. I took off quietly so I wouldn't wake any of the neighbours up or my missus or anything like that, and as I've driven off up the road, I've come up around a corner, because you sort of got to drive up a hill and then there's a couple of corners. And as I've come around the corner, I noticed something crossing the road, and I was only doing probably about 30 or 40 k's an hour, so I sort of like backed off, switched my high beams on, and there was this huge, and I mean it was big, thing crossing the road. I've come up on it like rolling to a stop sort of thing, and probably would have been 2 car lengths away that I stopped. But when I turned my high beams on, it's lifted its hand up towards me and sort of turned towards me, and then I realised that this was, I'm going to say it was like a massive, massive person, but it was carrying a full-size dead boar. Yeah, and there was blood dripping on the road, and it looked at, like, sort of like looked at me, but it had its hand up, like covering itself from the headlights shining in its face. Oh shit, like I just went, what the f*** is that? Like I could see the pig's head, and it had a pig slung over its shoulder, and it was draped down its back like a backpack. And I mean, this is a full-size boar. They're not little. There's no way I could even pick one up. So, yeah, basically I'd stopped by this stage, and it sort of still had its hand up looking at the headlights, and I went, oh, shit. So I switched the high beams off, turned my headlights on to, like, into parkers, and it just walked across, well, when I say walked, it sort of quick-stepped out of the way, off the road, and went straight down the side of the embankment. So I switched my headlights back on and put the handbrake on, jumped out of the car, and thought to myself, well, what the f*** was that? I've never thought about Yowies, or, you know, like I've heard the name Yowie, but I'd never considered it. And yeah, when I got out of the car, I had a bit of a look around, and like I could hear something walking off into the bush, and I mean it sounded like a full-size bull walking. You could hear the cracking and smashing through the bush, and it just didn't give a shit. Like, it just walked off. That was the first time I actually saw something that really blew me away. SR four-wheel drive, and it towered over that thing. Like, it had to have been close to the 3 metres tall mark. When it turned towards me and I got a good hard look at it for a second, like, it was 3/4 of the width of my car. And like I said, it had a full-size boar over its left shoulder, which was holding with its left hand. And it just had the 2 paw, like the hoofs in its hand sort of thing. And it was just carrying it like it was a shopping bag from Coles. All this sort of happened, I could jump back in my car and drove down the road a little bit, and I got to the next side street, which is called Cliff Barons Road there, and I actually stopped and just went, what the f*** did I just see? Like, that's bullshit. Completely stunned. I ended up going home and taking the day off work, because I didn't know what to do or think or anything like that. And then, yeah, it just, I don't know, I was dumbfounded. Was a really darkish brown and black. I'd almost say black, but it was like a really darky brown, long hair, probably 3-4 centimetres long, hair all over it, but its face wasn't human. It sort of looked like a human with a beard, but it had a really wide, flat nose. The eyes were just bigger than a person. It looked more like a gorilla, but not quite. The only thing you can compare it to is like the pictures they show you of like Neanderthals. And I mean, this thing was built, its arm, like, because when it put its hand up, I've got massive hands for a person, and when it put its hand up, its hand was twice the size of mine, but its biceps were like twice the size of my leg. This thing was like, I'd say it'd have to weigh 300 kilos plus without the pig. Not a lot scares me. I've grown up on acreage, after that happened, it actually made me rethink a lot of the stuff that had happened over the years. And I'd had a few experiences out in the bush where I'd heard something. I was walking home from work one night and took a shortcut through the bush, and something basically followed me home, and I didn't know what it was. What was that exactly, you know? So I just started flicking through stuff on like Netflix and stuff like that, and I saw a doco called Tracking Law. I'm not that good at Google or any of that sort of thing, and I just honestly didn't think there was anything like this in Australia. Yeah, I've seen it with my own eyes. So as much as I tried to convince myself it never happened, or it was a big homeless person or something like that, it was too big. I remember getting back in the car and it was 3:48 because I had to start work at 4:30. It was 3:48 in the morning. It was already like 1 foot onto the road, like in my path. So I had to slow down to not go onto the wrong side of the road because it's like a blind corner on a hill and you don't know what's coming the other way. So I was just like, you know, rolled to a stop sort of thing, but brake, you know what I mean? But it's only doing like 30, 40 Ks an hour. So I pulled up quite easily and just went, holy shit. Here I am, literally a car length or 2 car lengths away, face to face with this thing, just looking at me, stunned by my headlights. It had massive hazel-coloured eyes, and I mean twice the size of a human. Like, they were massive. They're just beady, massive eyes. It was that close. It was darkish, but when it put its hand out, it had its hand up trying to cover the glare of the lights going into its eyes. And how do I describe it? It was, the hands were just weird. I got rough hands because I'm a tradie and I work hard, but my hands looked soft compared to this thing, and it had like a pinkish patch in its palm. Not the same colour as us, like a darker colour, but really leathery. Only thing I could compare it to is a gorilla. It looked kind of stunned and pissed off at the same time. As I said, it looked at me, and when I flicked my high beams on it, it threw its hand up because the light was right in its face. Because it looked at me, realised that I was stopped, and then just turned its head and walked off. But the white of its teeth, I could just see the white sort of thing. But yeah, I just remember looking straight into its eyes and just going, well, it sort of just looked in the direction it was going and it walked off. Like, it's only a single lane road there, which is big enough for 2 quarry trucks to drive over sort of thing. And then you got the side of the road that's probably about 1 metre, and then it goes down like an embankment, but it's steep but not far. He took 2 steps and it was over the side of the gone. And the second it did that, like I said, I opened the door and got out of the car and started walking towards where it was, and I could hear it. It's not even running. What the f***? Yeah, it wasn't scared of me whatsoever. So I wouldn't say it had a beard, but it was furry, like it was hairy sort of thing. And its nose, whilst had a little like sparse bit of hair, but not a lot. The nose wasn't human. Like, it was more like a gorilla nose, like really wide, big nostrils. They're almost like eyes, you know what I mean? They were like on the front. You could see them. On a person, when you look at a person, you can't really see their nostrils unless you sort of look up their nose, but I could see its nostrils. It had its mouth kind of open, like it was going to yell at me or something like that, but it didn't. It looked at me and it had a look on its face like, you know, the light's in my eyes. It put its hands up, spotted that I was stopped, and just walked off. Yeah. And I mean, there was a trail of blood over the road, like drips of blood along the road. And as it walked off and went down the embankment, I could actually see it on its back. Like, there was blood dripping down and stuff. I was just like, holy shit. Like, how the do you kill a pig for one? Carry it. My dad used to take us pig shooting as kids, mate, and those things are unstoppable. It was a full-size boar. I never even realised around Kingsholme, Ormeau area that there were wild pigs other than the noises we used to hear at night. When we first moved there, I asked a few of the neighbours, I'm like, what the is that noise at night? It's koalas mating. And I'm like, really? So I've never heard screams and noises like that before. It's all just bushland and thick and dense. Like, we own 10 acres there, and it was that thick and that steep that you couldn't really walk through there. For a person to get through there, it was just like a mission. So we never even saw half of our property. When it threw its hand up, it was open palm, stop sort of thing. But it wasn't telling me to stop, if you know what I mean. It just threw its hand up to cover the light that was shining on it. The whole thing shocked and scared the shit out of me. It just happened really quickly. And I mean, the whole encounter probably would have been maybe 5 to 8 seconds. It felt like 10 minutes. I didn't see the feed. Like, I didn't look. I was too busy looking at the top half of it and just going, is that actually carrying a pig? 2 shocks were this thing and the fact that it had a full-size boar on its shoulder. That just blew me away. I reckon it would have been male because its chest was just, for no other words, it was fucking huge. It was muscly, like massive, an Olympic bodybuilder sort of thing, but covered in hair. It was built, you could see it was holding a full-size pig and it could feel the weight. It was sort of, I wouldn't say hunched over, but it was leaning forward sort of thing, carrying this thing like it was a backpack. And a full-size boar only went 3/4 of the way down his back. The top of its head was, I wouldn't say pointy, but it wasn't round like a person. It's like it had like a ridge along the top of its head sort of thing, but not huge. Maybe an inch or 2 high sort of thing, but it sort of came more than a human's head does. This massive monobrow. And its eyes were like sunken back into its head sort of thing, like way more than a person. Very much looked like a silverback gorilla, but twice the size. It freaked the living shit out of me. I can't describe how scared I was afterwards, and I've never been scared by much. I could honestly say there hasn't been a span of more than 2 or 3 days when I haven't thought about this thing and just gone, well, what the was it? How do you explain it? Anyone I've tried to tell has just laughed at me like I'm an idiot. It's changed my attitude towards the Australian bush. Since actually seeing it, nah, never again. Something like that can't just disappear. I'm surprised that more people haven't seen it, but at the same time, when you see something like that and you try and tell people, they just look at you like you're an idiot. I don't drink, I don't do drugs, I don't do any of that. I still have dreams and wake up like it just happened. Living up there in Kingsholme, we had kangaroos, koalas, goannas, all that sort of stuff, and the only time you'd ever see one is if you really tried to find one, if you know what I mean. So for years they told us there were no koalas, and then in the bushfire late 2013, and a koala came out of nowhere into our backyard and was drinking out of the dog's bowl. And everyone had told us for 13 years that there were no koalas around the area. It's easy for animals to disappear into the bush and us not to see them because we're just ignorant. I don't go looking for stuff. I don't go hunting stuff. And if I did, I probably wouldn't be able to find anything anyway. I didn't notice any noise, but when I jumped out of the car and did a walk around, there was a smell that reminded me of when I was a kid and Dad took us pig hunting, and I call it the smell of death, when you shoot something and then skin it. A rank ass odour. Your hand's almost like, I'd say dark, like an Aboriginal person's hand sort of thing, but you know how like when people have a burn and they've got the scarring and it's sort of pink? Yeah, like that. I'd say it was close to 3 metres, if not bigger. It was big, and like I said, it had a full-size pig just on its shoulder like a backpack. And it's just massive bit of kit. The noises you hear at Kingsholme at night are not any animal I've ever heard in my entire life, and I've lived in the bush my entire life up until 4 years ago. There's not a week that goes past where I don't think about it. It happened. it happened, and, you know, if someone wants to hear the story, I really want to pass it on to someone.
Yowie seen carrying freshly killed animals. It's nothing new. In fact, we have quite a few witness audio reports of people telling similar stories. And the impact has been just as hard. There's a lot more information regarding the Yowie encounters in the Ormeau area. Ormeau is a direct link to the GDR, and now one of the last gateways to cross the M1 into the cane farms to gain access to other known areas, such as Daisy Hill. In the 1980s, the Kawartha Forest and the bushland corridors along Slacks Creek would also have been an opportune location. If I went into details of other events surrounding Ormeau, it would take longer than the video you just watched. Natalie, who related her experience in the opening narrative, heard a scary screaming noise outside her house the same night her and her dog encountered something large and bipedal in the forest. Did it follow her home? Jason the arborist took it upon himself to canvass the area, talking to local residents, searching for more information about the Yowie he witnessed. One lady he approached while gardening in her front yard contacted me to confirm his validity. She wasn't particularly a believer. However, she did tell me a strange story of a hairy friend her young son had made in the forest behind their house. A hairy friend she presumed at the time was imaginary. One day, her son came to her saying his friend had to go back up into the mountains to live again with his family. That was around the last time we heard of that Yowie in that particular forest between the townships of Norfolk and Ormeau. Modern day Ormeau reports normally come from the verge of the mountain areas behind the township, but it doesn't mean they won't return. I'd like to say a quick thank you to Buck Buckingham for the hours of work creating the accompanying art for the narrative to these stories. As both myself and our witness have stated in many of our witness report videos, these are life-changing events for so many people. Unforgettable memories with an incredible haunting impact that they'll take with them to the grave. We thank them for coming forward to share their stories. And to you, the audience, thanks for listening.